Hi. For my topic for Module 7 of this week, I'll be talking about the rise of the evil empire, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was one of the major empires to arise during the 20th century and was a major challenge to American Christianity and America in general. It was one of the only two superpowers to emerge from the Second World War. All other nations were technologically and structurally inferior, and it was considered the major threat in the world to the West in the 20th century. And President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the focus of evil in the modern world in his speech from March 8, 1983. And if one looks at exactly how the Soviet Union treated Christians and people of faith, it's not hard to see why. First of all, the Soviet Union had state-enforced atheism. And I don't mean this in the sense that they basically said, "Oh, we don't care. We don't care if you're a Christian or a Jew or whatever else. We would just like you to believe in atheism." No. That's not how they conducted. That's not how they conducted their relations with Christians. Christians were heavily persecuted. Church building was extremely heavily restricted, and even if you did manage to get a religious gathering together or religious community, you always had to, in order for these religious gatherings, prayer meetings, etc. to be legal, you had to have at least one member of the Soviet secret police, KGB, etc. A Soviet authority of some type had to be present at every single prayer meeting, every single group congregation of faith, because the government was extremely paranoid about religious ideas being used to challenge the state's authority. Communism, by its very nature, puts government in the place of God and does not tolerate having a spiritual ultimate authority higher than itself. So you can imagine just exactly how strict this persecution was. A required textbook for Soviet public schools was the Atheist Handbook. Soviet public schools taught children that there was no God and that the state was supreme. And this is perhaps one of the most frightening aspects of the anti-Christian education system in the Soviet Union. Soviet children were encouraged to report their religious parents to authorities if they taught them something improper or unpatriotic. And if this sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact same thing that Nazi Germany did with the Hitler Youth. All religious organizations were very closely monitored by the KGB and state agencies, and if a religious leader or someone from the community spoke even a single word against the government or said something that the government didn't like, basically they disappeared, and that wasn't at all uncommon. Prayer meetings, and not only prayer meetings, but also the holy places themselves, were heavily supervised by Soviet authorities. This is one of their most insidious aspects of what the Soviets did with churches and so on. Church authorities took church bells, crosses, and other symbols of Christian faith from church buildings and other worship places, and they would put them in museums as part of Russian history. The Soviets didn't, of course, ask the churches or the people in charge of the buildings, the congregations, whether they wanted to donate these symbols. They would just take them by anyway. Not only did the Soviet authorities forcibly destroy or shut down holy places, they lied about why they did it. And I'm reminded of particular one case, a holy spring in Novgorod, which is one of the northernmost Russian provinces, and which will be important in a second, was drained to fight malaria and mosquitoes. Now, if you think about the notion that a tropical disease and tropical problem would surface in a subarctic Russian province, it is beyond ridiculous. In 1929, laws were passed by the Communist Party restricting the Orthodox Church, which is the largest Christian organization in Russia, and persecutions very soon followed. Starting with the reign of Nikolai Khrushchev between 1958 and 1964, church properties were seized by the Soviet government. And the most important aspect of this is that to the Soviet Union, America was the image of a Christian nation. Capitalism was antithetical to communism. Capitalism draws on the old biblical imperative, he that shall not work, neither shall he eat. Communism operated with a command economy, whereas in America, people who worked hard were rewarded. In the Soviet Union, the government could simply take whatever it wanted from the people who worked for it. So there was no biblical imperative of hard work because everyone was just basically robbed by the government. And for these reasons, the Soviet Union was one of the worst anti-Christian influences to emerge in the 20th century.